Maybe you know what's about to happen. We're in Oakland, California. It's June 19th, 2016. Game 7 of the NBA Finals between the Golden State Warriors and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Check the score and the time remaining. Barring disaster, the Cavaliers are about to win the first NBA championship in the 46-year history of the franchise. Cleveland fans have waited half a century for this moment. Before we witness it, we must give that drought a close examination. The Cavaliers enjoyed a miracle playoff run in their first decade of existence, only for new ownership to strip them bare, embarrass them at every turn, and nearly rip them from Cleveland entirely. In the 80s, this franchise got a lifeline and built the foundation of a contender almost in one night. But they were thwarted by the NBA's mightiest foes: injuries, bad trades, and that guy. Cleveland followed another miserable era with what felt like a gift from God, perhaps the greatest prospect ever, born and raised in Ohio, delivered by lottery to his hometown team, only for new ownership and weak management to fail their centerpiece, then drive him away. The Cleveland Cavaliers have died several times, victim of their own bad choices. Yet here they stand, alive, about to win a championship. To understand how much this means, we need to rewind. Like, really, really rewind. Perhaps you recognize this guy. This is Kyrie Irving. If we rewind about a minute of game time, we'll see Kyrie sizing up the defense on one of the most important possessions in Cavaliers history. With a tied score and 1 minute remaining, this game was in his hands. Rewind a little further and you'll recall the way Irving became a Cavalier. 5 years ago, the very bad 2011 Cavaliers made a pivotal trade. By surrendering a decent veteran, Mo Williams, to the Los Angeles Clippers, the Cavs received Baron Davis, but also an intriguing dice roll. The mediocre Clippers sent Cleveland their 2011 lottery pick, ultimately a 2.8% chance to receive the top selection in that summer's amateur draft. Those long shot odds paid off. The NBA draft allows bad Baron teams to conscript the best incoming talent, to choose elite young players who'd be unlikely to choose them. The pool of 2011 prospects was headlined by, you guessed it, Kyrie Irving. And after winning the lottery with someone else's ticket, the Cavs were clear to draft him, to all but force a future star onto their roster. In Cleveland, Irving developed into a brilliant point guard, an artist with his dribble, able to find the net from anywhere. That trade and its ideal payoff presented a welcome change for longtime Cavaliers fans. It meant a lot to see a bad team seize the best opportunity for improvement. The move that begot Kyrie Irving stands out in Cavaliers history. It epitomizes the unique value of draft picks, of choosing. To really measure that value, we must go back to the beginning. Cleveland, Ohio entered 1970 with big stuff happening. Carl Stokes was its first black mayor. The city had begun a major cleanup after the Cuyahoga River caught fire again the previous summer. In pro sports, the NFL's Cleveland Browns were contenders, even after the retirement of Jim Brown, who led them to their recent title in 1964. And a businessman named Nick Maletti was scrounging up cash to start a pro basketball franchise. It wouldn't be the city's first. For instance, Cleveland celebrated an ABL champion back in the 1920s. I feel like I missed out on the era when you could name a whole basketball team after one specific Jewish guy. Cleveland exited the Great Depression with its own arena. But mid-century, it was nearby Akron, Ohio that hosted the best amateur players and the most interesting industrial teams. with stars like Lil Baby Larry Brown, who played a couple years for the Goodyear Wingfoots, sponsored by the tire company. Hoop's glory returned to Cleveland in 1962, when George Steinbrenner experienced his first taste of successful sports ownership, the Cleveland Pipers, champions of another short-lived league called the ABL. Still, while Cleveland Arena occasionally hosted the Cincinnati Royals, it lacked a full-time NBA occupant. This was a pre-merger era when the league still competed with the ABA to plant flags in major markets. Enticing buy-in fees of just a few $1 million stoked expansion, inviting franchises that exist to this day. The hopeful NBA franchisee in Cleveland, Mileti, already owned the local arena and its resident AHL hockey team. He gathered a couple $1 million from a few major investors, then raised the rest by selling individual shares to regular people. And boom, Cleveland had an NBA team. The nickname Cavaliers won out over some other contenders. I like some of these, but anyway, time for basketball. Time to start working toward an NBA championship. Expansion teams build from expansion drafts. Cleveland got to pick over other teams' rosters for players left unprotected. This was one of the first routes by which people became Cavaliers. Players like John Warren, Walt Wesley, and Bingo Smith joined rookie John Johnson on the first ever roster. Those Cavs started off terrible, as expansion clubs often do. They lost their first 15 games, giving us the famous anecdote of Coach Bill Fitch trying to enter an arena without his credential and asking security why on earth anyone would lie about being head coach of a team that had literally never won a game. He got in. But Fitch's Cavs improved, in part because losing teams receive high picks in the college draft. In 1971, Cleveland used the first overall pick on Austin Carr, a guard coming off a stupendous collegiate career at Notre Dame. This old News 5 footage gives us a sense of how drafting looked back then. It was casual.
Cleveland draft, Austin Carr.
Austin Carr.
And this look of elation on Coach Fitch's face tells you how much one high draft pick can change the mood for a franchise. Injuries kept Carr from reaching his full Hall of Fame potential, but he nonetheless became the face of the team. Aging star Lenny Wilkens joined him in the backcourt for a couple years. Day one Cavalier Bingo Smith and 1974 draft pick Campy Russell held down the front court. In the mid-'70s, the Cavaliers moved out of their old downtown arena to Mileti's brand new Richfield Coliseum in the suburbs. And from Richfield, the Cavs tried something new: victory. Fitch won Coach of the Year, conducting a lively 49-win season in 75-76. Those Cavs depended on Jim Chones down low and got a boost of veteran know-how from a midseason acquisition, old Akron-born star Nate Thurmond. But Cleveland could get scoring from basically anywhere in their deep, super balanced rotation. That first winning season begot a first-ever playoff series. Cleveland's gripping back and forth with the Washington Bullets came down to the wire. Over 20,000 fans packed the Coliseum to watch Dick Snyder's terrific Game 7, which climaxed with this weird banked-in floater to go up 2 in the final seconds. On the last-ditch Bullets possession, Cleveland tipped the inbound, then got the stop. The whole building erupted, fans flooding the court in celebration of the so-called miracle at Richfield. Here's iconic Cavs announcer Joe Tate delivering the call with signature enthusiasm.
The Cavaliers win! 87-85. The Cavaliers have defeated the Washington Bullets 87-85. And the crowd is going berserk at the Coliseum.
People still wonder if those miracle Cavs might have run all the way to the 1976 title. What if Jim Chones had been healthy for the conference finals against the Celtics? Without Chones and his fractured foot, Cleveland went down in 6. The Bill Fitch Cavs never matched the miracle, but they kept winning, drawing fans to Richfield Coliseum and making playoffs. Yes, that's Walt Frazier. Momentum fizzled in 1979. when Cleveland's injured roster slipped to a 30-52 record. Fitch resigned soon thereafter and went to coach the Celtics, where things turned out pretty well. The Cavs improved somewhat the next season, even though their long-shot campaign to bring 43-year-old Wilt Chamberlain out of retirement failed. Cleveland got new leadership in coach Stan Albeck, plus a breakout scoring season from recent draft pick Mike Mitchell. They fell a few wins short of the playoffs. But the real Cavs stories were happening off the court. Nick Milletti decided it was time to cash out. Majority ownership of the Cavaliers changed hands repeatedly in early 1980, like once every couple weeks. We're about to talk quite a bit about the man who owned the team when the dust settled. But we should first acknowledge something often unsaid or misstated in Cavs history. A short-sighted move made while the dust of Milletti's initial sale was still flying. Again, worse teams receive higher draft picks, especially in this era before the lottery. But in February 1980, the mediocre Cavaliers dealt injured guard Butch Lee and their 1982 first-round pick to the very good Los Angeles Lakers in exchange for bench warmer Don Ford and LA's 1980 first-rounder. Cleveland traded future for present in the middle of a sale. And that, friends, is how the 1982 NBA champion Lakers, already employers of Magic and Kareem, got to select James Worthy first in that summer's draft, because the Cavs had bet on themselves 2 years prior and lost that bet. So let us be clear that Cleveland hampered its own future before this man took control. Not his fault. It's worth noting because everything I'm about to tell you is going to be his fault. This is Theodore J. Stepien. Stepien had been an amateur athlete growing up in Pittsburgh, then served in World War II. After the war, Stepien moved to Cleveland and founded Nationwide Advertising Service, a sprawling operation that placed classified ads in newspapers around the world. The business grew big, Stepien became wealthy, and he invested his newfound capital in Cleveland sports teams, baseball and softball to start. While business boomed, Stepien experienced personal tragedy. Anne, Ted's wife of 26 years and the mother of his 6 daughters, died in December 1979. I mention this because years later, Stepien's daughter said her father wouldn't have invested time and money in the NBA if not for Anne's passing. Stepien's purchase processed in spring 1980, and not without controversy. During a messy changeover, the league's board of governors questioned Stepien over strange and racist comments he'd made in recent years. He had said Cleveland's baseball team was owned by a Jewish clique and criticized its hiring of a black manager, Frank Robinson. Most relevant was something Stepien had once said about the Cavaliers. If he owned the team, he'd make half the squad white because white people need white heroes. The Cavs, he suggested, had too many black players. Pressed on those remarks, Stepien brushed them aside as marketing and insisted he wasn't prejudiced. Evidently, that was enough for the board because Stepien got approved to buy a majority share of the Cavaliers. The league was pretty desperate to keep its foothold in Cleveland. Stepien pledged to be an involved owner, and he certainly was, not just with basketball operations. Ted was always around the team, delighted with the attention and the hobnobbing. He blustered in earshot of reporters, betraying insecurity, pettiness, and just old-fashioned sleaze. Stepien adorned the Cavs' product to fit his own unique tastes, pushing them to be more than a basketball team. He spearheaded gimmicks like a Cavs-themed polka song and a dance team much deeper than the basketball roster. Stepien scouted the gastronomic talents of local legend Boot Buttry, seen here gallantly pursuing the world record for spaghetti eating. Stepien hired him to perform stunts like biting the tops off beer cans, and you can see why Boot deserved the gig. This was cheesy, relatively harmless entertainment. I emphasize relatively harmless to contrast with the way Stepien promoted his softball franchise in the summer of 1980. Recreating a stunt the baseball team had attempted, Stepien stood atop Terminal Tower in downtown Cleveland and dropped softballs 50-something stories to the street below, where players from the Cleveland competitors waited to catch them. Except he didn't drop them. He threw them outward. And when you know it, a projectile chucked with force from over 50 stories will travel a parabola well beyond the building's footprint. One wayward softball shattered the wrist of this poor bystander. Another injured someone's shoulder. One dented a car. The dude couldn't see the ground hundreds of feet below, which was by this point filled with panicked, scattering pedestrians. Eventually, Stepien opted for a gentler drop and got the catch he was looking for. The players looked happy to end the ordeal. This post-stunt interview with Stepien is a pretty good glimpse into the man's psyche. He's so matter-of-fact.
No one really told me what the exact situation was because I was very unfortunate.
So casually boastful.
I played a lot of softball, and I felt I could do what they wanted me to do is get the ball down to a player to catch the ball.
So quick to pass off blame after pelting people with softballs from the sky.
They told me that I should throw the ball 90 feet, which was correct, so when I threw the first ball, it was too far.
Oh, and always promoting, however awkwardly.
Jeff, I want to introduce one of our Cavalier ticket sellers, Janice Marin, so we had to put that in for you.
Okay.
So that's the extracurricular decision-making. Now let's talk about the basketball decisions. Wantonly heaving softballs off a skyscraper is actually a pretty good metaphor there. Stepien's foremost flaw as a leader was misplaced trust, a disastrous pattern of delegation. He was the kind of guy who'd send a random ad salesman on a basketball scouting trip. This trait stood out from day one. Stepien's first major front office hire was Bill Musselman. Musselman had been away from the game for a bit. He got the gig thanks to a coordinated campaign, with friends like baseball manager Billy Martin singing his praises. That did the trick, but not everyone was as dazzled as Stepien. Ohioans knew Musselman as the super intense former coach of the hated University of Minnesota. Specifically, he was the guy whose 1972 team delivered this deliberate-looking knee to a defenseless Ohio State player, sending him to the hospital and instigating a huge brawl. So, not the most popular guy locally. People remembered the fight and they blamed Bill Musselman. But now it was Musselman's job to help build a decent roster for Cavs head coach Stan interesting. Sensing doom, Coach Stan Albeck broke contract and fled for a job with the Spurs. To Musselman's delight, Stepien was like, okay, I guess you're coach now. For a general manager, Stepien settled on Don Delaney. Delaney's most recent relevant experience was as the coach of Stepien's softball team. Tight. Over just a few months, this brain trust would perform an astounding demolition. Thanks to trades, the 80-81 Cavs bore little resemblance to the team Stepien inherited. Before the season began, out went Foots Walker. Cleveland ditched their starting point guard and best passer, notably in exchange for a white player, Roger Fegley. Foots was delighted to be free from Stepien. The day after that trade, out went Campy Russell, one of Cleveland's top scorers. Russell had gone on the record about Stepien's racism. He'd also drawn Musselman's ire already for no discernible reason. Russell, too, was glad to be gone. He could tell Cleveland was headed the wrong way. The guys Cleveland got back in trades, guys who had no say in becoming Cavaliers, didn't have the juice to turn things around. And the regular season only brought more trades. Out went big man Dave Robish. Robish had just signed a contract extension during the Stepien takeover, but didn't exactly hit it off with Musselman. Cleveland traded Robish for a package centered around Kim Hughes, one of the worst shooters in the NBA, a guy whose main contribution to the Cavs was painting his dick green on St. Patrick's Day. While their teammates vanished, the poor souls stuck in Cleveland, both new and old, grew mutinous. Musselman drew their ire with stuff like wildly allocating playing time, and he made players wait around for practice to start while he finished racquetball games. But for this fan base, the short-term strife and roster damage weren't the worst of it. Remember, bad teams should not trade draft picks. They need those picks to add talent. Well, despite losing, despite already missing some future selections, Stepien's crew continued the trend of dumping picks. One team in particular reaped the benefits of Cleveland's complacency. The NBA expanded to include the Dallas Mavericks in the early 1980s. The Mavs actually snagged Austin Carr when Cleveland left him unprotected during the 1980 ownership change, kind of an unceremonious farewell for the team's first star. Carr joined the typical motley roster of an expansion team, but it didn't stay that way for long. In September 1980, the Cavs traded their 1984 first-rounder to the Mavericks. A month later, they sent this package to the Mavs: Bill Robinzine, whom they'd just acquired for Campy Russell, plus 2 future first-round picks in 83 and 86. Dallas coach Dick Motta once said he was afraid to take lunch for fear he'd miss a call from the Cavs, and he got them on the horn one more time that season. In February, the Mavs completed their set, acquiring Cleveland's 1985 first-rounder. Dallas went on to make the Western Conference Finals in 1988, just their 8th season of existence. These, in order of win shares, were the top 8 players on that 53-win team. Here are the ones they acquired using Cleveland's draft picks earlier in the decade. Dallas set up most of an elite rotation in like 3 phone calls with Ted Stepien and friends. Just to game this out because it's absurd, note that the Mavericks didn't even draft that well with Cleveland's picks. They could have had Clyde Drexler in 83. Sam Perkins was good, but not even close to the best player in the legendary 84 draft. Charles Barkley was the very next pick. Karl Malone was still on the board when the Mavs picked Detlef Schrempf in 85. We'll come back to that draft later. My point is, the Cleveland Cavaliers could have added any of these exciting 80s rookies if Stepien hadn't already surrendered their rights to Dallas. And the guys Cleveland got in return, aside from maybe Jeff Houston, didn't amount to much with the Cavaliers. Some of them didn't even have a chance. The most baffling example was that of Jerome Whitehead, acquired in the October 1980 deal that cost Cleveland 2 future first-rounders. The Cavs released Whitehead 18 days after that trade, straight up cut him for nothing, after sacrificing a huge part of their future for the guy. These transactions alarmed the NBA so much that the league stepped in and required all Cavalier trades get approval from above. They do not normally do that. Meanwhile, the team lost. They lost games, they lost fans. Just 5 years after their miracle playoff run, the Cavs were plummeting, far removed from title aspirations. Critics piled on with good reason. Feeling victimized, Stepien lashed out. Tired of the brutal honesty, Stepien drove beloved announcer Joe Tate away from the team and actually sued local radio station 3WE. He even physically attacked reporters. To be fair, I can see why his feelings were hurt. And Stepien counted plenty of enemies outside the media. Almost from the start, he threatened the whole city by insinuating he might move the team. And as losses mounted, Stepien passed off blame. He fired the PR guy. He removed Bill Musselman as coach, reassigned him to the front office, and replaced him with Don Delaney, the softball guy, someone who'd only ever coached basketball at the junior college level. Cleveland did have some bright spots on the court in 81. All-star Mike Mitchell, decent wings of different ages in Fegley and Randy Smith, improving power forward Kenny Carr. A rookie by the name of Bill Laimbeer broke out as a strong rebounder after other big guys departed. Within the next year, Stepien and Musselman would get rid of every person I just named. All of them. But 1981 brought changes to NBA labor relations. The Players Association had fought for and won a bit more control over where they worked. In the aftermath of a landmark court settlement, certain players could sign offer sheets with teams other than their own. If your old team wouldn't match the contract offer you got, they would have to let you walk. Today, we would call this restricted free agency. Now that some players could exercise some modicum of choice, Stepien wanted them to choose the Cavs. He was all over those offer sheets, cost be damned. After all, this was a guy who idolized George Steinbrenner, by this point famous for spending big to build the mighty New York Yankees. Stepien offered free agent Otis Birdsong $1 million a year, plus bonuses, the type of contract reserved at the time for the best of the best. Birdsong had already rejected Cleveland several times, but Stepien just kept pushing his number higher until it was undeniable. Cleveland's Birdsong offer actually got matched, but it jolted the whole market. Other owners were compelled to pony up unprecedented money to retain stars. They grumbled about whether the guy who had set the bar so high could actually afford these pricey offers. The Cavs' biggest of several successful free agency signings was James Edwards, a pretty good forward who described Cleveland with the zeal of someone paid like a superstar to move there. With new blood and mounting payroll, the 81-82 Cavs sucked. The so-called Cleveland Cadavers went 15-67, matching the failure of their first ever season as a franchise. It's really something when a player you scouted and acquired says you don't know basketball. But Stepien wasn't going to take the blame. He spent the season blazing through coaches. Stepien fired his pal Delaney after 15 games, but kept him on as GM, loyal guy. After 3 games of interim Bob Kloppenberg and a no thank you from Hubie Brown, Stepien brought in a new hire, Philadelphia assistant Chuck Daly. Daly arrived eager to make something work, but in the near term, the Cavs kept losing. Players insisted it wasn't Daly's fault. The roster just didn't make sense, but Stepien wasn't hearing it. He fired Coach Daly before the newcomer could even move into a home. Aborting a career stint Daly would later dub My 93 Days at the Richfield Holiday Inn. Stepien replaced Daly with Bill fucking Musselman, charming and popular as ever. Musselman bemoaned a roster he had helped build and later got accused by coworkers of threatening to fire them, harassing them with creepy phone calls, and spying. On the night Cleveland tied their worst ever record, Ted Stepien threw a reporter out of the Coliseum, then held a champagne party in the locker room. Players felt humiliated. Stepien said losing was their fault anyway. The players were all doing drugs. They were like, no man, you just did a very bad job building this team. Cleveland entered the 1982 offseason owning a rare draft pick they'd acquired by trading Lambeer. And they burned the pick on John Bagley, a player ranked so much lower by other teams that they thought the selection was a prank. You know, a draft goof. A new Cleveland GM said his employer had made historically bad deals. A new coach said it would be tough for the Cavs to improve with no draft picks until like 2003. Funny choice of year there. Fans, meanwhile, had reason to believe the Cleveland Cavaliers wouldn't even exist in 2003. Stepien's earlier threats of relocating festered. He flirted publicly with the idea of moving the Cavs or selling them to someone non-local. Entering 1983, Stepien had numerous potential new owners lined up, including Don King. Yes, that Don King. Clevelanders prayed for a local buyer, the obvious pick being the Gund family, owners of the Richfield Coliseum. But selling out of Cleveland seemed likeliest. Stepien spoke on a Canadian radio show about a buyer in Toronto. Pete Franklin, a talk radio guy Stepien once sued, phoned into that show to call Stepien a dumbbell. While the Toronto possibility loomed, other deals fell apart amid Stepien's hasty attempts to undo folly and recoup money. Stepien offloaded his signature free agent signing for cash, just so he could make payroll. Years later, James Edwards became a member of the Detroit Pistons, where he won 2 NBA championships with a couple former Cavs. future Hall of Fame coach Chuck Daly, and all-star forward Bill Laimbeer. Detroit actually got Dennis Rodman with a Cavaliers pick too. Anyway, back in March of '83, the Cavs roster once again slumped to a 59-loss season despite the best efforts of new star World B. Free. And the Cavs franchise was all but gone over the border. The deal was publicly regarded as done. Stepien had new branding and everything. From the ashes of the Cavaliers, the Toronto Towers were nearly born. Fans were irate. They wanted the owner gone, not Cleveland's only NBA franchise ever. Yeah, attendance was down, but that's because people refused to pay professional prices for Stepien's amateur product. From Boston, former Miracle Cavs coach Bill Fitch pleaded for an alternative. Cleveland had damn good fans who deserve better. But Stepien was not budging from the Toronto move. Nothing was going to change his mind. The Cleveland Cavaliers were dead, victim of homicide by Ted Stepien. And yet, here we are in 2016. The Cleveland Cavaliers exist. Moments ago, Kyrie Irving stared down a chance to play hero in the last minute of a finals Game 7. He isolated, rocked the ball back and forth into his right hand, pulled up, and...
One-on-one, Irving puts it up. It's good! Kyrie Irving from downtown! And the Cavaliers by 3!
One of the most critical, cold-blooded baskets in NBA history belonged to the Cleveland Cavaliers, because this team, unlike Ted Stepien's, traded for a top draft pick. They valued the opportunity to choose. But still plenty of game left. Back came the Warriors. Stephen Curry drew a dangerous switch against Cavs big man Kevin Love. We should examine how these guys got here. Doing so will help us unwind the path the lowly, Toronto-bound Cavaliers of the 1980s took to reach here. Before we watch this moment in history, we'll need to rewind a whole lot more.